Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on what part of the world you're in. And whatever time it is with you, happy St. Patrick's Day, and a warm welcome to Growing Your Business in Asia, which is the first event in Intralink's new Business Connect program. I'm Tariq Khwaja, and I'm going to be moderating what looks set to be a fascinating 60 minutes of hearing from people at the sharp end of growing businesses in China, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. And we're going to hear from a couple of speakers in a minute. And after that, we're going to have a panel Q&A session. So we're really keen to hear from all of you what your sort of questions are, whether it's a question about a particular talk that you're hearing on the session, or just some other burning issue you've got about how to successfully do business in Asia. So please do that. You'll see there's a Q&A function in Zoom here. Please use that at any point during the session to type in your question. We can't promise we'll address all of them, but we'll certainly go through as many as we can. I believe there's also a chat feature if you want to make any general comments on the session. So please don't be shy, please do that. But first, to kick things off, I'm going to hand over to Intralink's CEO, Greg Sutch, to say set the scene for us and say a few words of introduction.
Okay, thank you, Tariq. And also good morning, everybody, from me, or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in this virtual world that we live in now. Just a couple of minutes from me. Just a short self-intro. So my name is Greg Sutch. I'm the CEO at Intralink. Some of you will know Intralink. For those of you that don't, we are an Oxford-based Asia business development consultancy. So we help you, companies like yours, sell your products, license your technology, offer your services to customers or partners in East Asia being Japan, China, Taiwan, and South Korea. We started life in 1990, so we've been going for 30 years. And in that time, we've worked with many hundreds of companies to research, develop, and implement their strategies for that part of the world. And as a result, we, or maybe I should say they, have some quite interesting stories to tell about their journey to and in Asia. Mostly successful, but not always. There are some failures, and not necessarily because they failed, but there are instances where there isn't a product fit, or there is something that ultimately means that you're not going to succeed in Asia. So rather than have consultants like me spout advice, we thought it would be very interesting to invite some of these companies to come and share their stories with us. And hence, Asia Business Connect is born. And today is the inaugural event, and we have a couple of storytellers who are going to share with us their experiences of doing business in that part of the world. The first is someone I've known for a long time. He is the former CEO of Ultrasoc. I say former because he very successfully sold the business to a bigger fish, and I'll let you tell you about that. But I think that Asia and his success in Asia contributed ultimately to his ability to sell the business to the bigger fish. So, and that is Rupert Baines. So we look forward to hearing from Rupert. The second individual is one of our own. It's Jonathan Cleave, who is our managing director in Korea. He looks after the clients that we act for in that part of the world, mostly Western companies coming into South Korea for the first time. And he is going to share with you a story about a UK-based hydrogen fuel cell company, which I think it would be no exaggeration to say has made it big in South Asia. And we have gone along with them on that journey, and I think very interesting. And then finally, last but not least, three panelists, two from Santander, Scott Reeves, who's a Korea and Japan specialist. We have Dennis Lin, who is a China specialist at Santander. And then we're very lucky to have Mike Welch, who is Director of Trade and Industry at the Department of International Trade in the commercial section at the British Embassy in Seoul. So they will be joining us for the panel session at the end. I will also join, Rupert and Jonathan will also join, and Tarek, who is our marketing director, will moderate that session. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Rupert. I think just one final point I will make is I think the timing of this event is excellent insofar as Asia is hot right now. It's hot because I think it has managed the pandemic really very well, and frankly better than many countries in the West. And therefore it is really very much business as usual in Japan, China, Korea and Taiwan. And therefore there are interesting opportunities for those that are ready to go in that direction and make the journey to that part of the world. Thank you for joining us today, and over to you, Rupert.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Greg, for that introduction. Thank you to Tarek and the crew for pulling this all together. As Greg said, this is very good timing. The opportunities in Asia are huge. And just yesterday, the UK government strategic briefing talking about the importance of the region and both commercial and political implications of that. And I'm sure Mike will be able to expand on that. But it's very timely and very topical. And there are huge opportunities. And as Greg said, my history. So introduce myself a little bit. I'm a serial deep tech entrepreneur, been involved in a number of startups, 3 successful exits. One of them, Ultrasoc, was sold last year. The exit was done entirely over Zoom. And for most of those exits, most of those opportunities, Asia has been critical. To give 2 particular, almost case studies, discussions. For many years, I was CMO of a company called Picochip, and we were developing technology for wireless, 3G, 4G, and laying some of the groundwork for 5G. And over that entire time, Asia became approximately 60, 70% of our revenues, and most of our largest customers were in the Asia region. We didn't have a single customer in the UK, and we actually had very, very few in Europe. Over that time, we did a lot of business with the 4 key East Asian countries, China, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. Samsung in Korea was our largest single customer, a very, very good customer. Any of you who've worked with Samsung or heard of Samsung will know they can be a very demanding customer, but they can also be very supportive and very worthwhile. We also did a lot of business in Japan with Sumitomo and SoftBank, and some very strategic work there. And finally, in China, where at the time China was forging its way in wireless, and some little known companies like Huawei were storming ahead, and we were involved in supplying those. So all of those as key customers, and also the Taiwan market, which is a thing into itself with the ODMs. And one of the points that I think is worth stressing is these markets are different. There is no Asia. There is Japan, there is Korea, there is China, there is Taiwan, and you need an approach and a strategy for each of them targeted at that market. There is not a simple pan-Asia cookie cutter. I should mention, by the way, Picochip, we worked with reps and we worked directly. That wasn't actually with Intralink, although I did get to know the team and we overlapped at trade shows and events and conferences. And as such, when I became CEO of Ultrasoc 6 years ago, Ultrasoc was not selling anything to Asia at the time. Indeed, it was not selling anything to anyone very much at the time. And so I needed to fix that. And one of my first actions was to engage Intralink. And we did a survey of the market and of the 4 countries. And we worked primarily on China. And then after a few years, we turned on Japan as well. As I say, different markets, different approaches. And that became hugely successful. Huawei in China was Ultrasoc's biggest customer by quite a long way. We were doing very, very well in Japan. We'd won Denso, for example, and we're growing nicely. So just to sort of summarize before I hand over as some takeaways, it is definitely possible to be very successful in the Asian market as a Western company. And I would say even as a startup, there is often a perception that Asian customers are over conservative and doing business in Asia is so difficult. Startups should not bother. And I would say that perception is completely wrong. There are brilliant opportunities for startups in Asia, and some customers and some markets relish the opportunity of working with disruptive new suppliers. Secondly, you really should. It's a great market. There are really good opportunities. There are some really good customers. And finally, it can be really good fun. These are great places to do business. They're fascinating. They're so exciting and a lot of fun. And then finally, as I mentioned, don't think of Asia as a monolith. You do need a different strategy for each of the markets, a different approach, and you may well decide, as I did at Ultrasoc, to focus on 1 or 2 of the key markets and pause on some of the others. But there is plenty of help out there. Whatever the government department that used to be known as Department of International Trade, Department of Business, whatever, can be phenomenally helpful. And there are organizations and people like Intralink who can also be very, very helpful. So final words, go for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rupert. That's very interesting, actually. And I particularly pick up on the emphasis you make about not being able to take a sort of single pan-Asian approach, but needing to take a different approach per country. I've got a question for you, actually, that has come out of that. Just looking back over your experiences that you've described, is there anything that you would do differently in hindsight?
Oh, always do things differently in hindsight. At Ultrasoc, we recognized China as a very good opportunity, and that really worked well. We also thought we would do Korea, and we spent about 3 years banging our head against a brick wall in Korea, and we chose not to do Japan. And in hindsight, I would have reversed those 2. We actually found the Japanese market, when we did work on it, was much better than I'd expected. And if we'd started there 2 years earlier, would have been good. But that's the benefit of hindsight.
Of course. Interesting. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, Rupert. So we're now going to move to Jonathan Cleave, who Greg mentioned. Jonathan, I believe, has been working and living in Seoul for the best part of the last 2 decades, and as managing director of Intralink's South Korea operation, has helped a great many companies to expand in the country. So, Jonathan, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tarek. Thank you, Rupert, as well. Very interesting presentation. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Myself, my name is Jonathan Cleave. I'm the managing director here for Intralink's Seoul office. You can see it's dusk here in Seoul. We've just had I don't know if you saw it in the news, but the huge amount of dust and pollution coming over from the Gobi, but also from China. And actually that's just cleared out now. And we have a beautiful evening here in Seoul. A little bit about myself. I've been in Korea for 17 years, originally from London. I came to Korea, I studied my master's and my doctoral coursework here in Korea. I worked for a Korean software company where I looked after their international partners. And then I joined Intralink about 8 years ago. In that time, it fits me perfectly. It allows me to help European, North American, Israeli technology companies to understand the market here in Korea, across Asia more broadly, but specifically here, and to ultimately develop revenue out of this market. So that's who I am. And I had just had a little think today about perhaps 3 points that I want to make about how they did it. And actually, a couple of my points are how you shouldn't do it. And I think often lessons are best learned by what people did wrong, rather than just telling you exactly what people did right. So 3 points. And the first one I'm going to start with is a commitment to the market. Rupert very rightly said that all 4 markets out in East Asia are very different. However, probably I'm right in saying that all 4 will be a little bit more difficult to tackle than France or Spain or Canada or America for a British company or for a European company. Therefore, you need to commit to the market. Now, I'll give you just an anecdote to show this. We recently worked with a company out of Silicon Valley. They've got a machine learning algorithm for A/B testing. So helping various customers, but really e-commerce platforms to increase the conversion rates of people that come onto their platforms. We started working with them after 3 or 4 months. We did a market analysis. After 3 or 4 months, we said to them, listen, we can sell your solution. However, you are going to need, there's a little bit of integration required. You're going to need some technical support. And what we advised is that once we get the first customer, that that's too early for them to take the risk and hire a local engineer. But after the first customer, we asked them just to put an engineer in Silicon Valley across Korea morning hours. And we said to them, once you get your second customer, we advise you then to hire a local Korean engineer who can take the engineering discussions away from us, and we can continue with the business development. They agreed to that. After 7 months after we started with them, we signed the first customer. And then 11 months after starting with them, so another 3 or 4 months after that, we signed the second customer. Now, at this point, they had over $300,000 of revenue, potentially recurring revenue out of Korea, but they refused. They still thought it was too early to get the engineer on board. This was a fatal mistake. And what it ended up meaning was that our team, particularly the project manager who drove this so well and so successfully closed the deals, ended up spending all of her time negotiating between the engineers across 2 different client accounts and doing all of the account management, and couldn't do the business development to increase the revenues out of the market, and ended up not pleasing anybody. So it's a real tale of woe. And it really does speak to the point, I think, that if you're going to try and crack Asia, yes, they can be very, very profitable markets, but you really have to make sure that you're willing to commit the resources, commit the time, and support these customers. One thing I think that's often forgotten or overlooked in the rise of Asia, rise of Korea in particular, is just how important after service is. It's incredibly important that your customer knows that you're going to be there, that he can pick up the phone, usually is he, can pick up the phone, speak in Korean to a local person, and that you're going to be there to support the journey over months and years. The labor markets are not particularly as fluid here as they are over in the West. So if somebody's going to stake their reputation and say, for example, somebody, Samsung or LG, say, listen, we think we should use this solution, they are risking their reputation. So they need to be very confident that you're going to be there to support them. So commitment to the market, that's the first one. Second one, take the time to understand the market that you are looking to explore and looking to develop. This really is essential. Take 3 or 4 months and have your own understanding, have your own commercial team, your own ability to understand the local market, to understand the competitors, to understand the regulations, to understand partners and partners' capabilities, before making a decision on which partner to go to, particularly if it's a channel partner market entry approach. A very quick story, we have a similar client recently in the smart factory IoT space, who came to us and said, listen, we've already signed a partner. It's a global name, it's a Korean global name. They're going to be brilliant. They really like our technology. All we need is somebody to pretty much liaise with them, translate, and just support the team. Now, when we started working with them, we thought it was a little strange because this global partner, yes, they've got the heft, they've got the resources to develop the market, but they don't have the software, the IoT selling experience. So we were a little concerned, and sure enough, it turned out it was very, very difficult. And actually they've asked us to do all of the business development and sales instead, and just hand those accounts over to the local partner as they get hotter. So really take the time to independently understand the market before jumping in and choosing a partner. So that's my second piece of advice. And then the third one, Greg mentioned this, that we have, we do a lot of work here in Korea, particularly in hydrogen and fuel cells and the hydrogen economy. Recently, our client, Ceres Power, has signed a large manufacturing and licensing collaboration deal with Doosan. It's all public knowledge. We helped them to secure that here in Korea. And what did they do right? Well, first of all, they showed the commitment to the market, and they took the time to understand the market that we're going after. They did actually have a local partner. They have a local partner, but it wasn't an exclusive relationship, which allowed us to then go out and find new potential partners for them. And the key thing, I think, when I was really kind of sitting down and thinking, well, what is the difference? What makes the difference between success and failure? Ultimately, a little bit banal almost, but it is a differentiated and proven product and timely product. If you have a product which is fairly similar to a lot of the other products or solutions in that category, you're going to find Asia fairly tough. They'll probably be cheaper. They'll probably be better service, after service, and they may well even have a better functionality as well. But if you do have a product, as Ceres certainly does, which is differentiated, which is world class in their case, in the solid oxide fuel cell space, I think I'm fairly on firm ground saying that Ceres Power is truly world class. And you have a timely solution. I mean, at the moment, there's a huge amount of capital investment going into the hydrogen economy here in Korea and more broadly in East Asia. Then East Asia and Korea can be a very profitable market. So commitment to market, understand the market before jumping in, and make sure that your product is timely, differentiated, and proven, I think are the three key takeaways that I would advise. And just to conclude, to say, East Asia, why East Asia? Well, I mean, it's a booming market. It is hard. It's certainly not an easy market to explore or to develop, but the rewards can be great. And it is a lovely place to live, to work, to do business, or to export to, depending on whatever model it is. So as Rupert said, I will just echo that, either through Intralink or through the DIT, and you'll hear from Mike, don't let anything stop you, and please give it a go. And with that, I'll hand back to Tarek.
Thank you, Jonathan. Very interesting. You talked about the experience of companies that don't make it, as well as companies that do succeed. For those perhaps who don't, so can you pick up on, is there a common thread? Is there a common mistake that sometimes companies make, or is everybody different?
Everybody's different, but I will say this, that sometimes, especially when we are, we deal a lot with technology companies, generally scale-ups out of Europe or North America, and often they are trying to license into the larger OEMs here in East Asia. So often I will say to clients, be careful what you wish for, because if you do catch a client, an interested customer, they can be very, very demanding. So just make sure, I think we've certainly had quite a few clients of ours that have failed, I think largely because they haven't put the necessary resource, whether it's engineering resource or whatever it is, into supporting the accounts once they start to see a deal coming into view.
Okay, interesting. Okay, thank you. Right, well, we now come to the panel part of the discussion. So it means I have some, it means that Jonathan and Greg and Rupert are going to stay and join us, and I'd ask them to put their cameras on. But we're also going to welcome some additional people. And if I do that one by one, and first introduce, we have Mike Welch, who's a director from the Department of International Trade based in Seoul. Mike, could I ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your role?
Oh, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, because I had slight problems getting in at the start. So great. Well, welcome everybody. So yeah, my name is Mike Welch. I'm the Director Corporate of Trade and Investment here in Seoul. So my team are responsible for supporting companies that want to export here to Korea and also to try and get Korean investment into the UK. But I'm also here today sort of wearing a slightly sort of pan-APAC hat. Increasingly in recent years, we've become much closer as a region, and you might well have seen in the news in the last day or so the integrated review outcome, which spoke of an Indo-Pacific tilt. So there's now a real focus on trying to get greater trade and investment with this part of the world. So it's a great time to be turning your attention this way, and my team and my colleagues across the region are here to do our best to help you. I'll leave it at there, but happy to take other questions in due course.
Great, thank you, Mike. And also joining us from Santander Bank UK, we've got Dennis Lin, who's the bank's China market specialist. Dennis, would you tell us a little bit about your role?
Sure. Thanks, Eric, and thanks to all the panelists. So yeah, I look after our trade investment corridor for Santander UK. My responsibility is to support corporate clients, UK corporate clients, to trade invest between China and the UK using both Santander's banking solutions. And we also have a very unique non-banking solutions to facilitate a lot of these trade investment activities between the two countries. I just thought to sort of echo on some of the really important points that our colleagues make. So being a Taiwanese Canadian who has worked in China, Taiwan, and Korea, I want to attest that Rupert's comments that all the countries are all very unique on by themselves. So I just want to really echo that.
Great, thank you very much. And we've also got Scott Reeves, who joins us from Santander Bank, and Scott is the bank's Japan and Korea market specialist. So Scott, perhaps you could say a few words about your role.
Yeah, absolutely, Tarek. And once again, thanks to all the panelists as well, and for allowing me to be here today. My job is essentially exactly the same as Dennis's. I help our corporate clients and our commercial clients to essentially export to, expand in, or indeed import from Japan and Korea, between the UK and those two trade and investment corridors as well. So really nothing further to add on my side that Dennis hasn't covered. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. So coming to some questions, Mike, I'd like to start with you. What we've heard in the last few minutes is some stories of companies that have tried to expand in Asia and made a success of it, and maybe some of the reasons that some companies stumble. Does what you've heard very much reflect your experience of supporting companies, or again, is everyone's case different, or are there some common threads that you recognize?
Sorry, there we go. At the risk of sounding boring, the points already made by Rupert and Jonathan, I thought were absolutely spot on. And it is really about having that commitment to the market. I don't think it's unique to this region, but relationships are always key, and investing the time in building those relationships. I think just as Jonathan said, some of the people you're going to be dealing with are going to have been in their positions for a long time, and so there's a lot riding on their relationship with you from their perspective. So it is really worth investing in those relationships. I think one of the other things that I would just flag at the moment as well is that you can find contradictions. So in Korea, for example, I think it has more free trade agreements than any other country in the world, and yet you'll still find quite a strong protectionist element that runs through the commercial world here. So that can be a sort of slight odd dichotomy to negotiate. And one of the things that I think our teams are really focusing on around the region at the moment as well is around market access issues, because I think there's some great sort of teams like Intralink out there to help companies land where we can perhaps really add some value is in helping to try and address some of the market access barriers that the companies find. So if people that are dialing today are finding particular barriers that are stopping them getting into markets, then please do bring them to the attention of DIT colleagues in the region, because that's the area where I think we can add real value at the moment.
Great, thank you. I've got a question also for Dennis. Dennis, I know that you were a sort of lead part of the team that set up Santander in China. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your experience of doing that. I don't know whether it sort of mirrored some of what Rupert was saying or if it was very different, but yeah, fill us in.
Thanks, Terry. Absolutely. So broadly speaking, so when Santander entered the Chinese market, there are two stages. So back in 2008, we set up the Hong Kong branch and the Shanghai branch, but that's only for like the corporate investment banking side. So it's still quite a restricted area. But in 2014, that's when we enter in the retail and corporate commercial banking space. And our entry strategy was very similar to what we've heard today, was to find the right partner and set up our own local WOFE or wholly foreign owned entity there. So we became the third largest shareholder of Bank of Shanghai, that's our local banking partner, and formalized a strategic partnership, as I said, 2014. So I think even though that, a lot of people will consider us as a big multinational organizations, but we went through very similar learnings like our speakers today, and perhaps most of our audience also. So I thought to share some of my personal experience when I was part of that sort of Santander Asia market expansion team. First thing, so I supported a retail banking transformation project. So together at that time with my Spanish managing director, we actually traveled to almost all the Bank of Shanghai branches to share our best practice. So this effort to travel out to even some of the most remote community bank branches from Bank of Shanghai really had that grassroots effect to influence their retail banking business, that sort of ground up that influence there. And for the corporate banking collaboration, so this is the part that I led. We call the project One Bank, meaning that both Santander and Bank of Shanghai team must work together as one. So we deliberately sort of sat within Bank of Shanghai's international team and had this tactical approach of pairing. Pairing meaning that at the most critical seniority levels, Santander would have a equivalent staff to pair up with Bank of Shanghai's counterparts. So, and equally important was to have someone, a Mandarin-speaking person like myself, could be quite effective to quickly build up that trust for both teams to work as one. So, I think that grassroots influence, that visibility to your counterparts, that proximity to work alongside each other with your partners, and have the right employee to be sort of that catalyst for collaboration were some of the best practice that Santander would use. And I thought it was quite maybe really worth sharing with our audience. So yeah, that's some of the things I would like to share.
Thank you, Dennis. Scott, was the approach very much the same in Korea and Japan, or like Rupert, did you find you needed to take a different strategy for different markets?
Yeah, no, very much like Rupert, to be honest, Tarek. So as Dennis just alluded to, in 2014, and probably a little bit earlier, our bank, Santander, was going through an expansionary phase. So we were looking to buy local banks, or indeed buy a shareholding like we did in Bank of Shanghai, in order to gain market presence there. By the time we were looking at Japan and South Korea, which relatively recently, 2018 is when I started to head up those corridors, we were taking a different approach. So what we were looking to do is form partnerships with local banks that already had a presence, that already had a deep customer base there that essentially we could collaborate with. And that allowed us then essentially to create what we call the Trade Club Alliance, which for anybody that's never heard of it before and wants to know what it is, just think One World Alliance for airlines, but for banking. Now, the reason we kind of moved away from the expansion kind of plans and policies that we had, just expense. I mean, for anybody that's interested, I don't know if there will be, but just to set up one branch, if you think a local banking branch that you've got down your high street, is £20 million. It's not a cheap exercise. So we thought partnership could bring more benefits with less cost. Now, we sought out these local banks in Korea. It was the Industrial Bank of Korea. That was relatively easy, relatively simple to form a partnership with them. And essentially these partnerships that we try to engage in normally kind of try to center around three main principles, which is that the banks themselves promote international business development of their own clients, that the banks themselves promote business opportunities between their clients as well, so they connect them in order to increase any kind of commercial capacity for both of them, and also that the banks themselves try to provide a trustworthy environment to ensure efficiency between both parties when they're communicating, contracting, and negotiating. So like I said, Korea was relatively easy. Japan, we actually had a difficulty, so we were kind of the flip side of Rupert with this. We partnered with MUFG, who's the largest bank in Japan, one of the largest banks in the world, I think fourth largest outside of any other Chinese bank. And we found that whilst they wanted a particular solution with regards to the partnership that we offered, they absolutely wanted to connect their clients with European clients or clients in Latin America, etc. How they wanted to do that was very different from how we wanted to do it. I won't bore anybody with the details on that, but what we had to learn was cultural challenges. Just as Rupert had said, there is no one solution for Asia. So the solutions that we provided to Industrial Bank of Korea at that time were not going to work for MUFG. And we had to realize that just because someone in Japan, for instance, seems enthusiastic on the surface, and just because they talk a lot, doesn't mean that inside they're just having absolutely none of it. They just don't want to say no. And there was a learning experience for me, it was a learning experience for the team to realize how to understand when someone in Japan says no without them actually saying no. So in terms of learnings from that, culture is key. Your strategy can fall apart if you do not understand local culture. And again, what was key for us was understanding hierarchy as well. So eventually, obviously not everybody can do this, but we just had to get the CEO and the CEO of MUFG together in a room, sat down talking, and then everything's been glorious since, obviously. But yeah, that's essentially my takeaway, would be understanding culture.
Great, thank you, Scott. We have a question submitted here, which is sort of on the surface looks very easy, but I think it's probably a difficult one. So I'm going to throw it over to Greg. And Greg, the question is, which market is easier, China, Japan, or Korea?
Oh my goodness. Well, that is a difficult one, and I think it depends very much on your business and on the market. Frankly, I think one thing that I'm personally guilty of, and I think Intralink more broadly is guilty of, is taking our understanding of the culture for granted. I was out in Japan for 20 years, in China for 4. Jonathan's been in Korea for 17 years. And we sometimes forget that if you've not done business in that part of the world, you don't understand in the way that we do. So I think trying to understand some of the key cultural characteristics of each market is critical. But and you can make some generalizations, which on the one hand might make it easier, and on the other hand might make it more difficult. But I think actually you can't really answer that question without looking at the specific product in the specific market. What I would say is that collectively those markets represent huge opportunity. I think apart from anything else, probably the world's largest concentration of corporates. Okay, probably more in the US, but they are spread out. But if you think about the number of corporates across every sector that you can imagine, whether it's chemicals or automotive or electronics or pharmaceuticals in Tokyo, Seoul, and Shanghai, Beijing, it is phenomenal. So you can be very efficient when you visit those parts of the world. It doesn't mean you have to travel around a bit, but there's an awful lot you can do just in those 3 or 4 cities. And let's not forget that the GDP, the combined GDP, as one measure of those 4 markets, is bigger than the US. The combined population is 5 times bigger. That's not to say that everybody has disposable income at the consumer level, certainly in China, but a very large proportion of the population does have disposable income. And let's not also forget that all of those markets, including China, but particularly Japan and Korea, represent global opportunities. So rather like Rupert, if you are licensing into a Samsung, that almost certainly is going to go into a global product. So Asia represents, for many companies, a global opportunity. It's not just about the domestic opportunity that is also there. And so to put that into perspective, Korea would be the equivalent of a large European economy. It's 52 million people. It's now the 10th largest economy in the world. And with the exception of Taiwan, that's the smallest of the 3. Okay, Japan 126 million, world's 3rd largest economy. China 1.4 billion, the world's 2nd largest economy. Lots of opportunities, and impossible to say which. And what is your character? Hey, I think that's also important. And is your character? What's the chemistry going to be like between you personally? And the individuals that you meet, and more broadly, the culture of the target market. Not a great answer, fudged it a bit, but back to you, Tarek.
Thank you, Greg. I guess this is a related question someone submitted. I'm going to pose it to Rupert, if you have a view, Rupert, which is it true that the Chinese do deals more quickly than the Japanese?
I mean, that's certainly the conventional wisdom. And I would say, in general, to the extent you can ever generalize, yes, it's true. The Japanese place much more of an emphasis on having a long-term relationship, building up trust, and the expectation that you will be partners in the long term. And therefore, they are more cautious. The Chinese are much more willing to take a punt, to try something new, and correspondingly more willing to dump you rather than work with you if there's a difficulty. But that is a generalization, and there are always exceptions. I've done deals in Japan that have happened astonishingly quickly. At Ultrasoc, one of our fastest ever deals was in Japan because we had the right product at the right time and a good relationship. So it's broadly true, but not always.
Thank you, Rupert. Mike, this, if you have a view on this, someone has asked, when introducing a new product, how do you go about protecting against intellectual property theft?
Very carefully, I think it's the short answer. Yes, I mean, all joking aside, that can be an issue in this part of the world. So you do need to make sure that you've got the right IP sort of certifications in place to protect yourself as best as possible. Each market will be slightly different. We do have, and apologies, this isn't meant to be an infomercial, but on the gov.uk site for the different countries, we do have links as to what to do as regards intellectual property rights in each market. But yeah, don't come here unless you have properly secured your IP. would be my strong advice. But I don't know, Jonathan, I don't know if you have a view on what it's like certainly here in Korea.
I would agree with that. Nothing really more to add.
Okay.
Eric, I thought the previous question was very, very interesting about China versus Japan efficiency. And I thought to give a very unique view on this. And, you know, I wonder if people agree with me. So my experience is that the Japanese and the Koreans, having worked with the Koreans and worked in Korea for a number of years as well, I find that the hierarchy is one of the main constraints. So that notion of Confucianism, that they need to follow this sort of chain of command to take a decision, is quite, it's different from the Chinese, who tends to be a bit more entrepreneurial. So they will be quicker to make a decision. You know, during my times with the large chaebols in Korea, you know, one joke that we often talk about is that we need to, and this could be advice, is that you need to look beyond the English title and look at the Korean title to determine who you're speaking to, whether, you know, whether you're going to get somewhere if you're speaking to that individual. Where I find that working in China, the communication and decision making tends to be, as I said, much more entrepreneurial and seems to be faster. But it's not to say which one is better, which one is worse. But I think the rigor and the governance with the Koreans and the Japanese seem to be tighter. I'm not saying that the Chinese less so, but the Chinese tends, in my opinion, tends to get to a decision faster. So I thought that was something interesting to share.
Thank you, Dennis. Okay, we've got another question that's just in, which is, touches on, I guess, the sort of international travel difficulties that everybody has now. Are these posing a barrier to doing deals in Asia? Is it still possible to, without actually physically going out there, meeting the CEO of a customer to do a deal? I think it's one for Greg.
Well, it depends on how you feel about having an anal swab when you go to Shanghai. Though I mean, that has been a problem, and it is at the moment. But I think that's changing. It's a real problem. I mean, if you look, each of the three markets are slightly different. At the moment, as far as I'm aware, foreigners cannot travel to China or Japan at all. There's a blanket ban. I'll ask you about Korea in just a second, because I think Korea is different. I think you can go, but there are quarantine requirements unless that has changed. What it means is that you have to take a different approach. And if you're not able to travel, you've either got to engage with your customers or your prospective customers, just as we're speaking to you now via Zoom or Teams or whatever it is, or you need to find somebody who's in the territory to act on your behalf. Particularly if you're still at the business development stage, there's no question in my mind that you need to be meeting face-to-face with your prospective customers, licensees, partners, and that you are going to really struggle to develop those sorts of relationships and ultimately close deals via sort of virtual means. Actually, I personally am traveling out to Japan in July, provided that you have had the vaccine, which I haven't, but I'm having it on Saturday, and you present a strong case for permission to go to Japan, which in our case is we have a large team out there and haven't been for a year. They will make exceptions, and I believe I will get a visa, though I'm not in receipt of that yet. Jonathan, maybe just over to you on the specifics about Korea, but I think it's very difficult to travel at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Yeah, just very quickly. Yeah, Korea, it's 2-week quarantine pretty much for anybody coming in. But interestingly, specifically in relation to the question, is it harder to do deals, or is it possible still to do deals? In calendar year 2020, Korea did, Intralink Korea did our most deals that we've ever done. Now, some of those were legacy, so some of those were the discussions already started in 2019. The teams had already met, perhaps with our client CEOs or VPs out of APAC or out of Europe. So some of them carried on into 2020, but some of them were started and finished in 2020, all virtually. So I think that's something that probably I would have been proven wrong. I probably would have thought 6, 8, 9, 12 months ago that that would have been a really tough thing to have done in Korea. But actually, no, I mean, the world is moving and Korea is moving and changing. And we found that, yeah, there are deals are being done, even if, I mean, of course, we are on the ground. So we are there as the surrogate to be able to, make sure that they can build trust with us. But no, with our clients who have not yet come to market, we are still doing deals.
Thank you, John.
I could just, if I could just add to that as well, Tarek. So certainly we thought as well in the bank that this would be a nightmare issue that we were facing with regards to our customers and our clients when trying to connect them. However, what we found is in Korea, very much so, we've been able to do business as usual, probably easier than it was before, to be honest. In Japan, now this is just obviously personal experience from myself, it has been more difficult than it had previous to lockdown, previous to COVID-19. But I really just have to kind of echo again, Rupert, if you've got the right product at the right time, I don't think the challenges that we face currently pose any kind of risk or any kind of issue to doing any kind of deal or securing any contract at all. So you just have to make sure that you're just properly based and essentially you've got the resource in order to make these contracts worthwhile.
Great, thank you, Scott. One of our attendees has asked, or they've commented that they found that their own dialogue with Huawei and some clients in Asia over the last year has gone previously from sort of easy and proactive and open to quite difficult more recently. And they were asking if anyone shares that experience. I don't know, Rupert, you're nodding there. Do you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think the geopolitical issues, trade embargoes have made Huawei in particular, but a lot of Chinese customers very sensitive about working with Western companies, and it's very unfortunate. But yes, we noticed the same.
Okay, Dennis, do you have any views on this when it comes to Chinese companies?
So, so my view is a reflection of more on the mid-market, mid-sized business and SMEs. It's slightly different opinion from Rupert. And we actually did an article on this and research on this. We find that there is a divergence of sort of the geopolitical between the government and the real business sentiment. So I think it's, I would say it's like we're in a very triple threat environment where there's COVID, Brexit, and I forgot what's the third one that I had in mind. But it puts UK business in this thinking mode that they need to sort of, they need to think outside UK and Europe. And from that perspective, actually, we've seen, as Scott alluded to, we've seen a pickup that conversations with China has grown. The willingness to want to talk to them is more, despite the geopolitical, the Uyghur situation, the different government level obstacles. So, but just talking about Huawei, we don't have actual, because as I said, we're focused more on the SME and mid-market space. But I want to share the sentiment that we are observing a sort of divergence between sort of geopolitical and the business sentiments.
Thank you, Dennis. This is I guess, a sort of maybe a related question from another attendee, which is they say they work for a US tech company. They wish to expand in Japan, Korea, and China, but they're a bit concerned about sort of anti-US sentiment in these countries currently. Greg, do you have any advice for that person?
Actually, I can share some experience, and in a funny sort of way, actually, Rupert Ultrasot was a beneficiary of this. This is a year or two ago when we were knocking on the door of Huawei. Maybe it's 3 years ago now that we first knocked on the door. And at the time, the administration in the US had started to impose the various trade restrictions, which meant that US tech companies in particular were no longer able to sell or license into China. And actually that presented opportunities to non-US tech companies, of which Ultrasoc was one, being a British company. Now, I'm not suggesting that we got the business as a result of that, Rupert, and it was a difficult decision because ultimately that could create problems for you in the US. But there was also so I'll just mention that point, and then I would echo what Dennis has said. We, like you, Dennis, work for predominantly SME and scale-up type businesses, and provided they've got the right solution, the right product at the right price at the right time, and understanding also that the Chinese in particular are entrepreneurial and highly transactional, they will do the deal. And perhaps it's more a question of perception at this end than reality at that end. That would be my view on that. Rupert, I don't know whether that's a fair comment. It's certainly from our end, vendors felt as though we were benefiting a little bit from the fact that we weren't American.
I certainly think that was the case for a while. I'm not sure it's still the case.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yes.
Okay, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to just. I think we've got a chance to pose one more question. I've asked you to be really brief. Is it a good idea to learn a bit of Chinese, Japanese, Korean if you're trying to do a deal out there? Maybe we can just have a sort of a yes or no answer from everybody. What do people think? Jonathan, is it necessary?
To learn a bit of, I mean, during the course of the deal, to learn the Korean, that's not going to be an easy task.
Not an easy task. But I think the question's about, I guess, learning a few words to show courtesy, and also to learn some of the cultural intricacies like bowing and holding chopsticks, etc. Is what they're asking.
Yeah, 100% it is. Of course it is. 100%. Yeah.
Okay, Dennis, view.
Yes, absolutely. Especially sort of the simple Korean, Chinese, Japanese over drinks. I think your counterpart will take that quite favorably.
Great. Okay, Mike, any views?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely. It's amazing how the disproportionately positive impact it can have if you make an effort.
Great, perfect. All right, we're going to have to wrap up here because we're out of time. If there are any other questions we haven't got to, we'll try and follow those up by email. But I'd just like to say thank you so much to all our speakers. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. I hope you found it as interesting and useful as I certainly did. There's a short feedback survey which you'll find, I think, somewhere on your screen or by email. Please do fill it in to give us some of your thoughts on the session to help us improve for the future. Do get in touch with any of our speakers with any other questions you've got. That you'll find their contact details will be on the screen or in the follow-up. I know they'll all be very keen and happy to talk to you as a follow-up to this. Do look out for our future events in the Intralink's Asia Business Connect program. And that's it. Thank you very much for joining us and have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, everybody.